The Ravaging Hunt. Elira Voss had never feared the Bonewood. It had always been her home, its trees older than time, its shadows a place of solace rather than fear. But the night she turned 21, the trees began to whisper, and the path she had walked all her life led somewhere new. A clearing that should not exist. A throne carved from black stone, waiting. And standing beside it, a man she had never seen before, yet knew in the marrow of her bones. "You have come at last," he murmured, stepping forward. His golden eyes gleamed in the dim light. "I was beginning to think you had forgotten our deal." Chapter 1. The Whispers of Bonewood. The air in Bonewood had always hummed with a low, thrumming energy, a secret song only those born within its shadow could truly hear. Elira Voss, her silver hair braided tightly down her back, a practical measure against the clinging branches, felt it in her very bones, a familiar vibration that had been her lullaby since birth. Bonewood was her sanctuary, its gnarled, ancient trees her silent companions, the rustling leaves her constant confidants. She knew every root and hollow, every hidden stream and moss-covered stone. Or so she had believed. Today was her 61st birthday, a day that, like all the others since her husband, Thomas, had passed 5 years prior, promised only a quiet solitude. The village of Oakhaven, nestled at the edge of Bonewood, held little appeal. Its well-meaning residents, with their pitying glances and offers of casseroles, felt like an intrusion on her carefully constructed grief. She preferred the company of the woods, the earthy scent of decaying leaves, the damp chill that seeped into her clothes, a comforting reminder of the cyclical nature of life and death. Elira paused, her hand resting on the rough bark of a particularly ancient oak, its branches reaching skyward like skeletal fingers. The air felt different, thicker, somehow charged with an unfamiliar energy. It was a subtle shift, something most would dismiss as a trick of the light, the play of wind through the leaves. But Elira had always been attuned to the subtle nuances of Bonewood. She had a connection to this place, a deep-seated understanding that went beyond mere familiarity. It was in her blood, passed down through generations of Voss women, each one tied to the woods in ways the villagers could never comprehend. She continued her walk, her worn leather boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. The usual path, one she had trod countless times, felt strangely unfamiliar. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches intertwining overhead, creating a dense canopy that blocked out the already fading afternoon light. The familiar rustling of leaves had taken on a new quality, a whispering urgency that sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't the wind. She knew the wind's voice, its playful gusts and mournful sighs. This was different. "Hello?" Elira called out, her voice a little shaky, even to her own ears. Only silence answered her, a silence so profound it felt heavy, pressing down on her. She wrapped her arms around herself, the worn wool of her shawl offering little warmth against the sudden chill. She wasn't afraid. Not exactly. Bonewood had never been a place of fear for her. But the unease was growing, a knot tightening in her stomach. The path, which should have led her towards the familiar clearing where she often sat and sketched, seemed to be curving, subtly altering its course. She frowned, her brow furrowed in concentration. Had she taken a wrong turn?
Impossible.
She knew this path like the lines on her own palm. Yet the trees ahead looked wrong. Taller, darker, their branches more twisted and gnarled than she remembered. The whispering intensified, growing louder, more insistent. It wasn't words, not exactly, but a susurrus of sound, a chorus of rustling leaves and creaking branches that seemed to be urging her forward, drawing her deeper into the woods. Elira hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing her mind. Should she turn back? Return to the familiar safety of her cottage? But something held her there, a pull, an unseen force that seemed to emanate from the depths of the woods. It was a feeling she had never experienced before, a sense of anticipation, of inevitability, as if she were being drawn toward something, some predetermined destination that she could not avoid. Taking a deep breath, Elira continued forward, her steps slow and deliberate. The air grew colder, the light dimmer. The trees pressed in around her, their shadows stretching long and distorted, like grasping claws. The whispering grew louder, a constant murmur that seemed to fill her head, drowning out all other sounds. She felt a prickling sensation on the back of her neck, the instinctive feeling of being watched. And then the path opened. Not into the familiar clearing she expected, but into a space she had never seen before. A circular clearing, bathed in an ethereal, silvery light that seemed to emanate from the full moon hanging low in the sky. In the center of the clearing stood a throne, carved from a single piece of black stone, its surface smooth and polished, reflecting the moonlight like a dark mirror. And beside it a man. He was tall, his presence dominating the clearing, even though he stood perfectly still. He was dressed in clothes that seemed both ancient and timeless, a dark, leather jerkin, fitted trousers, and boots that reached his knees. His hair was the color of raven's wings, long and unbound, falling around his shoulders like a dark cloak. But it was his eyes that captured her attention. They were a startling shade of gold, glowing with an inner light that seemed to pierce through the shadows. Alira stopped, her breath catching in her throat. She stared at him, her mind struggling to comprehend what she was seeing. He was beautiful and terrifying. A strange mixture of familiarity and otherworldliness clung to him, like the scent of wood smoke and something wilder, something untamed. He turned his head, his golden eyes meeting hers. A slow smile curved his lips, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You have come at last," he murmured, his voice deep and resonant, sending a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "I was beginning to think you had forgotten our deal." His words, spoken with such calm certainty, struck her like a physical blow. A deal? What deal? She had never seen this man before in her life. Had she? A flicker of doubt, a whisper of a memory, brushed against the edges of her mind, but it was gone before she could grasp it. Her heart was thudding a frantic rhythm against the wall that she has carefully built through the years. What had she walked into? Chapter 2. The clearing that shouldn't be. Alira stood frozen, her gaze locked with the stranger's. His words echoed in her mind, a nonsensical riddle that sent a wave of unease washing over her. Our deal? She opened her mouth to speak, to demand an explanation, but no sound came out. Her throat felt tight, constricted, as if an invisible hand were wrapped around it. The clearing itself was an anomaly. It defied logic, defied her intimate knowledge of bonewood. She had walked these woods for 61 years, explored every nook and cranny, mapped every hidden path. This place, it shouldn't exist. The black stone throne, the unnaturally still air, the ethereal moonlight, it all felt wrong, like a scene from a dream, a fragment of a forgotten story. The man took a step closer, his movements fluid and graceful, like a predator stalking its prey. He was close enough now that she could see the intricate details of his clothing, the fine stitching on his leather jerkin, the silver buckle on his belt, shaped like a wolf's head. The scent of him reached her, a heady mix of pine needles, wood smoke, and something else, something wild and musky, that made her senses prickle with a strange awareness. "You don't remember, do you?" he said, his voice softer now, laced with a hint of disappointment. It was a subtle shift, barely perceptible, but Alira caught it. It was the first crack in his carefully constructed facade of calm control. She finally found her voice, though it was barely a whisper. "Remember what?" I don't know you." He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that sent another shiver down her spine. "Oh, but you do, Alira. You may not remember me consciously, but your soul remembers. It remembers the promise, the bargain struck long ago." He reached out a hand, his long fingers extended towards her. Alira instinctively recoiled, taking a step back. His touch, even the possibility of his touch, sent a jolt of fear through her, mixed with a strange, unsettling attraction. It was a confusing, contradictory sensation that made her head spin. "Don't be afraid," he said, his voice a silken whisper. "I won't hurt you. Not unless you force me to." The threat, veiled though it was, hung heavy in the air. Elira looked around the clearing, desperately searching for an escape route. But the trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches intertwined, forming an impenetrable wall. She was trapped. What do you want?" she asked, her voice trembling. He smiled again, that same unsettling smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Only what was promised. Only what is rightfully mine." He gestured towards the black stone throne. "Sit," he commanded, his voice firm, brooking no argument. Elira hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to flee this place, and never look back. But something held her there, a strange compulsion, a feeling that she had no choice but to obey. It was as if her will were no longer her own, as if she were caught in a web, a silken trap spun from shadows and moonlight. Slowly, reluctantly, she walked towards the throne. The black stone was cold and smooth beneath her fingertips as she ran her hand over its surface. It felt ancient, as if it had been there for centuries, waiting for her. She sat down, her body stiff and rigid. The throne was surprisingly comfortable, molded to fit her body perfectly. But the coldness of the stone seeped into her bones, a chilling reminder of the unnaturalness of this place. The man stood before her, his golden eyes gazing down at her, filled with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. He looked like a king, a ruler of some forgotten realm, holding court in this hidden clearing. "The Bonewood remembers," he said, his voice echoing in the stillness. "It remembers the oaths sworn, the blood spilled, the promises made. And it remembers you, Elira Voss, the last of your line, the one who carries the burden." Elira frowned, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Burden? What burden? I don't understand." He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingertips tracing the line of her jaw. Elira flinched, but she didn't pull away. His touch was surprisingly gentle, sending a wave of warmth through her, a stark contrast to the coldness of the stone. "The curse, Elira," he said, his voice a low murmur. "The Bonewood's curse. It's in your blood. It's been passed down through generations of your family, a legacy of darkness and despair. And you are the key." He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "You are the one who can break it, or you are the one who can unleash it." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Elira stared up at him, her mind reeling. A curse? Her family? It was all too much, too strange, too unbelievable. And yet a part of her, a deep, primal part of her, recognized the truth in his words. A truth that had been buried, hidden, forgotten for generations. A truth that was now rising to the surface, threatening to shatter her carefully constructed reality. The weight of something ancient and terrible settled upon her shoulders. Where would she even begin? Chapter 3. A deal struck in shadows. The word curse hung in the air, a chilling echo in the silent clearing. Elira felt a tremor run through her, a physical manifestation of the fear that was rapidly consuming her. Her carefully constructed world, the quiet solitude she had built around herself, was crumbling, replaced by a reality that was both terrifying and strangely familiar. I don't know anything about a curse," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. She wanted to deny it, to dismiss it as a delusion, a product of the strange atmosphere of this hidden place. But she couldn't. Something deep inside her, a primal instinct, told her that he was telling the truth. The man, whose name she still didn't know, straightened, his golden eyes studying her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. He seemed to be searching for something, probing her very soul. "Your ancestors knew," he said, his voice low and resonant. "They made a deal, a pact with the forces that dwell within Bonewood. A pact to protect their family, to ensure their prosperity. But every deal has a price, and that price was never fully paid." He began to pace slowly around the throne, his movements fluid and graceful, like a predator circling its prey. "Generations ago, your great-great-grandmother, Maeve Voss, was a woman of great power, a woman deeply connected to the magic of Bonewood. She could speak to the trees, command the wind, heal the sick. But her power came at a cost. She drew upon the ancient energies of this place, energies that were not meant for mortals to wield. Elira listened, mesmerized, her fear mingled with a growing fascination. She had always felt a connection to Bonewood, a deep-seated understanding that went beyond mere familiarity. Could it be that this connection, this power, was the source of the curse? Maeve grew arrogant. The man continued, his voice hardening. She believed she could control the forces she had awakened. She made a deal with me. A deal to secure her family's future, to ensure their dominance over Oakhaven and the surrounding lands. In exchange, she promised a sacrifice. A life for a life. He stopped pacing and turned to face her, his golden eyes blazing with an intensity that made her heart pound in her chest. But Maeve was a coward. She couldn't bring herself to make this sacrifice. She tried to cheat, to trick me. She offered substitutes. Animals, trinkets, empty promises. But the deal was clear. A life for a life. A Voss life. Elira felt a cold dread creeping through her veins. She had a terrible feeling she knew where this was going. And so, the curse began, he said, his voice a low growl. Each generation of Voss women has been plagued by misfortune, by tragedy. Their lives cut short, their loves lost, their dreams shattered. The curse has followed you, Elira, like a shadow, clinging to you, feeding on your despair. He reached out and touched her hair, his fingers gently stroking the silver strands. Your husband, Thomas, he was a victim of the curse, wasn't he? A sudden illness, the doctors said. But it was more than that. It was the Bonewood, claiming what was owed. Tears welled up in Elira's eyes, tears of grief, of anger, of fear. Thomas, her beloved Thomas, taken from her too soon, leaving a void in her life that she had never been able to fill. Was it all a lie? Had his death been predetermined, a consequence of a deal struck centuries ago? But there's hope, the man said, his voice softening. The curse can be broken. The debt can be paid. And you, Elira, are the one who can do it. He knelt before her, his golden eyes level with hers. I can help you, he said, his voice a silken whisper. I can show you the way. But you must trust me. You must be willing to surrender. His words were seductive, alluring, offering a glimmer of hope in the darkness that had enveloped her. But Elira hesitated. Trust him? This stranger, this creature of shadows and moonlight, who claimed to have made a deal with her ancestor. It was madness. And yet what choice did she have? The curse was real. She could feel it, a heavy weight pressing down on her, threatening to consume her. If there was even a chance, a sliver of hope that she could break it, she had to take it. What do I have to do? She asked, her voice trembling. He smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent a shiver down her spine. First, he said, rising to his feet, you must tell me your name. Say it aloud, Elira. Let the Bonewood hear you. Let it know that you are here, that you are ready to claim your inheritance. The pull to obey, to give in was growing stronger. She felt a pressure, almost, like she was betraying something, someone by not giving her name. Elira, she breathed, the word tasting like ash and hope on her tongue. Elira Voss. The air in the clearing shimmered, almost vibrated. She could swear she heard the whisper of leaves replying. He took a step back, the first space that had been between them since this nightmare had begun. He ran a hand down his face, and Elira was struck with how very human the gesture looked. Now, Elira Voss, we begin. He gestured to something behind her. Turn around. She was hesitant, of course she was. He was still an enigma, a dangerous unknown. Yet, that spark of hope, however foolish it may be, compelled her. Slowly, she swiveled on the throne, wondering what new horror awaited her. Instead of fear, the sight that awaited her caused confusion, then disbelief. It was a mirror. Not an ordinary mirror, mind you. It stood taller than any man, framed in dark, carved wood, intertwined with what looked like twisting vines and thorns. But that wasn't the disturbing part. It was the reflection. Or rather, who was in the reflection, standing beside her. It wasn't him. The man from the deal, the wolf-eyed stranger. It was Thomas. Chapter 4. The Mark of the Wolf. Elira gasped, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a cry. Thomas. Her Thomas. Standing beside her in the reflection, his arm around her waist, his familiar smile gracing his lips. He looked healthy. Younger, even, than he had on the day he died. The lines of worry that had etched themselves onto his face during his illness were gone, replaced by a youthful vibrancy that stole Elira's breath away. But it wasn't real. She knew it wasn't. It was a trick, an illusion, another cruel twist in this nightmarish game. Thomas was gone. She had held his hand as he took his last breath, felt the warmth slowly fade from his body. She had buried him, said her goodbyes, spent the last 5 years trying to piece together a life without him. Don't be fooled, the stranger said, his voice a low growl behind her. It's just a reflection, a memory. A phantom of what was not what is. Elira ignored him, her gaze fixed on the image in the mirror. She reached out a hand, her fingers trembling, and touched the cold glass. It felt solid. Real. She could almost feel the warmth of Thomas's body, the familiar scent of his aftershave, a blend of sandalwood and citrus. Thomas, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. The reflection of Thomas smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners, just as they always did. He leaned in, as if to kiss her, and Elira instinctively closed her eyes, her heart aching with a longing so profound it was almost unbearable. Open your eyes, Elira, the stranger commanded, his voice sharp and impatient.
Don't lose yourself in the past.
It's a dangerous place to dwell. Elira hesitated, but she slowly opened her eyes. The reflection of Thomas was still there, still smiling, still looking at her with a love that mirrored her own. But something was off. His eyes, usually a warm, comforting brown, held a flicker of something else, a hint of gold, that sent a shiver of unease down her spine. He's not real, she whispered, more to herself than to the stranger. He's a part of you, isn't he? The stranger didn't answer, but his silence was confirmation enough. He was manipulating the reflection, using her memories, her grief, to control her. It was a cruel, manipulative tactic, and it filled her with a rage she hadn't felt in years. Stop it, she said, her voice stronger now, fueled by anger. Stop playing with my memories. Show me the truth. Show me what you really want. The reflection of Thomas flickered, his smile fading, replaced by a look of sadness? Or was it something else? Regret? Elira couldn't be sure. Then, the image dissolved, fading away like smoke, leaving only her own reflection staring back at her. She was alone again, facing the stranger in the moonlit clearing. The black stone throne felt cold and hard beneath her, a stark reminder of the reality she was trapped in. What I want, the stranger said, his voice regaining its silken quality, is for you to understand your destiny, Elira. To embrace the power that lies within you. To fulfill the promise that was made. He walked towards the mirror, his reflection appearing beside hers. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the intoxicating scent of him, a mixture of wildness and something else. Something ancient and powerful. Look closely, he said, his voice a low murmur. He reached out and touched the mirror, his fingers tracing the outline of her reflection. Do you see it? Elira looked, her eyes scanning her reflection, searching for something. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she knew she would recognize it when she saw it. And then she did. On her left shoulder, just below the collarbone, a mark. It was faint, almost invisible, like a faded birthmark. But it was there. A small, intricate design, shaped like a wolf's head, its eyes glowing with a faint, golden light. Elira gasped, her hand flying to her shoulder, her fingers tracing the outline of the mark. She had never seen it before. It wasn't a birthmark. It was something else. The mark of the wolf, the stranger said, his voice filled with a strange satisfaction. The sign of your lineage, the symbol of your power. It has awakened, Elira, and it will not be denied. He stepped back, giving her space to absorb what she was seeing. This mark binds you to Bonewood, to me, to the ancient pact. It is a reminder of your responsibility, of the debt that must be paid. Elira stared at the mark, her mind reeling. It was all too much, too fast. The curse, the deal, Thomas, the mark. It was a whirlwind of information, of emotions, that threatened to overwhelm her. What am I supposed to do? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The stranger smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent a shiver of fear and anticipation down her spine. You are to learn. You are to grow. And you will find, Elira, that your curse is also the source of your greatest strength. He reached out a hand toward hers.
Come.
Let us walk together in this new path. Elira looked at the man. She looked at the mirror and the faint image of the wolf, and last, she looked down at his outstretched hand. What was the right decision? The answers seemed both to be in her reach and to be impossible. Chapter 5. Echoes of a Forgotten Past. Elira hesitated, her gaze flickering between the stranger's outstretched hand and the faint, wolf-shaped mark on her shoulder. Trust was a fragile thing, easily broken, and hers had been shattered too many times to count. Yet, despite her fear, despite the logical part of her brain screaming at her to run, she felt an undeniable pull, a strange sense of obligation. She took a deep breath, steeling her resolve. She couldn't run from this, not anymore. The curse, the deal, the mark, it was all a part of her now, whether she liked it or not. And if there was even a chance, a sliver of hope that she could understand it, control it, maybe even break it, she had to take it. Slowly, she reached out and placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, surprisingly warm, sending a jolt of energy through her, a sensation that was both unsettling and exhilarating. It was as if a dormant part of her, a part she hadn't even known existed, was awakening. Good, he said, his voice a low murmur. Now let us begin. He led her away from the clearing, back into the depths of Bonewood. The trees seemed to part before them, their branches shifting and swaying, creating a path where none had existed before. The whispering of the leaves intensified, growing louder, more insistent, but now it no longer felt threatening. It felt welcoming. As they walked, the stranger, he still hadn't given her his name, began to tell her more about the history of the curse, the deal that had been struck, the consequences that had followed. Maeve Voss, your ancestor, was a powerful woman, he said, his voice echoing through the trees. She had a gift, a connection to the ancient magic of Bonewood. She could heal the sick, control the weather, even communicate with the spirits that dwell within these woods. Elira listened, captivated, her fear slowly giving way to a growing fascination. She had always felt a connection to Bonewood, a deep-seated understanding that went beyond mere familiarity. Now, she realized that this connection was more than just a feeling. It was an inheritance, a legacy passed down through generations of Voss women. But Maeve's power came at a price, he continued. She drew upon the ancient energies of this place, energies that were not meant for mortals to wield. She made a deal with me, a deal to secure her family's future, to ensure their prosperity. In exchange, she promised a sacrifice. A life for a life. A Voss life. He paused, his golden eyes flickering in the dim light. But Maeve was a coward. She couldn't bring herself to make the sacrifice. She tried to cheat, to trick me. She offered substitutes. Animals, trinkets, empty promises. But the deal was clear. And the Bonewood it remembers. Elira shivered, the coldness of the night seeping into her bones. She could almost feel the weight of the curse, the burden of her ancestors' sins, pressing down on her. And so, the curse began, he said, his voice a low growl. Each generation of Voss women has been plagued by misfortune, by tragedy. Their lives cut short, their loves lost, their dreams shattered. The curse has followed you, Elira, like a shadow, clinging to you, feeding on your despair. He stopped walking and turned to face her, his golden eyes searching her face. But you're different, Elira. You are stronger than the others. You have the power to break the curse, to end the cycle of suffering. But you must be willing to embrace your destiny, to accept the power that lies within you. He reached out and touched the mark on her shoulder, his fingers gently tracing the outline of the wolf's head. This mark, he said, is a symbol of your connection to Bonewood, to me, to the ancient pact. It is a reminder of your responsibility, of the debt that must be paid. Alira looked at the mark, her mind racing. It was all so much to take in, so much to process. But one thing was clear, she couldn't run from this, not anymore. She had to face her destiny, whatever that may be. Tell me, she said, her voice stronger now, what is your name? He smiled, a slow, enigmatic smile that sent a shiver of anticipation down her spine. My name, he said, his voice a low murmur, is Lyle. Lyle. The name felt ancient, powerful, resonating with the magic of Bonewood. It suited him. Lyle, she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. It felt right. And now, Alira, he said, we have much to discuss. There are things you need to know, secrets you need to uncover. The past is not dead, Alira. It lives on, in the whispers of the trees, in the shadows of Bonewood, in the blood that flows through your veins. He looked up. The moon was barely visible. We must hurry. The others are coming. Alira's eyes widened. The others? Who? She opened her mouth to question him, but he silenced her with a gesture. He gripped her upper arm and started to pull her. The urgency in his grasp, the way he tensed, all told her one thing. They needed to run. Chapter 6. The Hunter's Moon Rises. Lyle's grip tightened on Alira's arm, his urgency palpable. We must hurry, he repeated, his voice low and strained. They're coming. Who's coming? Alira asked, her breath catching in her throat. She stumbled over a root, nearly falling, but Lyle kept her upright, pulling her along at a pace that was almost too fast for her to maintain. The hunters, he said, his voice grim. They've been tracking me for weeks. They know about the curse, about the deal. They believe I am a monster to be eradicated. Alira's heart pounded in her chest. Hunters? Hunting him? The thought was terrifying, but it also sparked a flicker of something else. Defiance. She didn't know Lyle, not really, but she had seen the vulnerability beneath his carefully constructed facade. She had felt the strange connection between them, the pull of the ancient pact. She couldn't just abandon him to his fate. Why do they hunt you? She asked, her voice strained as she struggled to keep up. Because they fear what they don't understand, Lyle replied, his voice tight with anger. They see only the power, the magic, the connection to Bonewood. They don't see the burden, the responsibility. He glanced over his shoulder, his golden eyes scanning the trees. They're close, he said. We need to find shelter. He led her off the path, deeper into the woods, towards a thicket of tangled undergrowth. The branches scratched at her arms and face, but she didn't complain. She trusted Lyle, at least for now. She had to. They reached a small cave, hidden behind a curtain of ivy. It was dark and damp, smelling of earth and moss. Lyle pushed aside the ivy and ushered her inside. Stay here, he said, his voice low and urgent. Don't make a sound. I'll draw them away. No, Alira said, her voice firm. I won't let you face them alone. Lyle looked at her, his golden eyes searching her face. He seemed surprised by her defiance, her willingness to stand by him. You don't understand, he said. They're dangerous. They're trained killers. They won't hesitate to I don't care. Alira interrupted. I'm not afraid. I'm a Voss. We're not known for our cowardice. A flicker of admiration crossed Lyle's face, quickly replaced by concern. Alira, we're in this together, she said, her voice unwavering. Whether we like it or not. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. All right, he said. But stay close to me. And do exactly as I say. He drew a long, curved knife from his belt. The blade gleamed in the faint moonlight that filtered through the entrance of the cave. It looked ancient, as if it had been forged in the fires of some forgotten realm. They waited in silence, their breaths held, listening for any sign of the hunters. The air was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. And then they heard it, the snap of a twig, the soft thud of footsteps, the hushed voices of men. The hunters were here. Lyle positioned himself in front of Alira, shielding her with his body. He held the knife ready, his muscles tense, his eyes focused on the entrance of the cave. "Remember," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Stay close. And don't make a sound." Alira nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement. It was as if she were stepping into a different world, a world of magic and danger, a world she had always sensed but never truly known. The voices grew louder, closer. Alira could make out snippets of conversation. "Tracks lead this way, can't be far now, remember the order's dead or alive." Suddenly, a figure appeared at the entrance of the cave, silhouetted against the moonlight. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothing, a crossbow held in his hands. He was followed by 2 more men, similarly dressed, carrying swords and torches. The hunters had found them. The leader of the hunters, a man with a scarred face and cold, gray eyes, raised his crossbow. "Lyle," he said, his voice harsh and grating.
"Come out."
"We know you're in there." Lyle didn't move, his body a shield in front of Alira. "Leave us alone," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "We don't want any trouble." The hunter laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "Trouble? You are trouble, beast. You and your kind. We're here to end it, to cleanse Bonewood of your filth." He fired the crossbow. The bolt whistled through the air, striking Lyle in the shoulder. He grunted in pain, but he didn't fall. He stood his ground, his golden eyes blazing with fury. The hunter reached another arrow. "Alira," Lyle whispered, his voice strained.
"Run."
"Get out of here." She didn't move. Lyle was hurt. "I said, run." His words cut through Alira, sharper than the hunter's blades. But she couldn't run. Not when the arrow was pointed at him. Not when that arrow should have been for her. She stepped forward, the silver of her hair bright, even in the dark. "Stop," she commanded. Her voice was clear and filled with newfound strength. It was the voice of Bonewood itself. Chapter 7. Scars of Trust and Betrayal. The hunter with the scarred face froze, his crossbow halfway raised, his cold gray eyes widening slightly in surprise. He stared at Alira, his gaze flickering between her and Lyle, who was still grimacing in pain, his hand clutching his wounded shoulder. Who are you?" The hunter stammered, his voice losing some of its harshness. "I am Alira Voss," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "And this is my land. You are trespassing." The hunter scoffed. "Your land? This forest belongs to everyone. And that creature," he gestured towards Lyle with his crossbow, "is a danger to us all. He must be eliminated." "He is under my protection," Alira said, her voice unwavering. "Leave now, and I will forget this ever happened." The 2 other hunters, who had been standing silently behind their leader, shifted uneasily. They exchanged nervous glances, their confidence seemingly shaken by Alira's unexpected appearance and her commanding presence. The scarred hunter, however, remained defiant. "You can't protect him," he said, his voice regaining its harshness. "He's a monster, a creature of darkness.
He deserves to die."
He raised his crossbow again, aiming it directly at Lyle. Alira stepped in front of Lyle, shielding him with her body. "If you kill him," she said, her voice low and dangerous, "you'll have to kill me first." The hunter hesitated, his finger hovering over the trigger. He looked at Alira, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and confusion. He clearly hadn't expected this, hadn't expected a woman, an old woman, to stand up to him, to defend a creature he considered to be an abomination. "Move aside, woman," he growled. "This is not your fight." "It is now," Alira said. She felt a strange surge of power coursing through her veins, a tingling sensation that started in her fingertips and spread throughout her body. It was the same feeling she had experienced when she touched Lyle's hand, the awakening of a dormant part of her. The mark of the wolf on her shoulder began to glow, a faint, golden light that illuminated the darkness of the cave. The hunters gasped, their eyes widening in fear. They had heard the stories, the legends of the Voss women and their connection to Bonewood. They had dismissed them as old wives' tales, but now, seeing the glowing mark, they were forced to confront the truth. She's one of them, one of the hunters whispered, his voice trembling. Don't be ridiculous, the scarred hunter snapped. It's just a trick. A parlor trick. But even he seemed unsure, his confidence shaken. He lowered his crossbow slightly, his gaze fixed on the glowing mark. Lyle, who had been watching the scene unfold in silence, reached out and gently touched Alira's arm. Alira, he whispered, his voice strained, be careful. You don't know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing, Alira said, her voice firm. She turned to face him, her eyes filled with a determination he hadn't seen before. I'm protecting you. I'm protecting us. She turned back to the hunters, her gaze unwavering. Leave, she commanded, her voice echoing with the power of Bonewood. And never return. The hunters hesitated, their fear battling with their ingrained hatred. They looked at each other, their faces pale in the flickering torchlight. Finally, the scarred hunter lowered his crossbow completely. We'll go, he said, his voice grudging. But this isn't over. We'll be back. And next time, we won't be so lenient. He turned and stalked out of the cave, followed by his two companions. They disappeared into the darkness, their footsteps fading away into the night. Alira stood there for a moment, her body trembling with the aftershocks of the confrontation. She felt drained, but also exhilarated. She had faced her fear, stood up to the hunters and won. Lyle gently touched her shoulder. Are you all right? He asked, his voice filled with concern. Alira nodded, slowly turning to face him. She looked at his wounded shoulder, the blood seeping through his leather jerkin. You're hurt, she said, her voice filled with remorse. I'm so sorry. I should have. It's nothing, Lyle interrupted, wincing in pain. It's just a scratch. It was clearly more than a scratch. Alira reached out and gently touched his arm. Let me see, she said. He hesitated, then slowly removed his jerkin, revealing the wound. It was deep, the arrow having pierced through the muscle. Alira felt a surge of anger, of protectiveness, towards this man, this creature, who had become so unexpectedly intertwined with her life. She touched his arm, a question. With his nod, she moved to his shoulder and began to examine the damage, the torn flesh. I need to clean it, Alira stated. And bind it. Lyle nodded, but remained silent. He was watching her, his gaze intense. His eyes made her feel exposed, seen, in ways she had not experienced in a very long time. Alira tore a strip of cloth from her shawl, a soft wool that Thomas had given her years ago. A pang of grief pierced her heart, a reminder of all she had lost. But she pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. She dipped the cloth in a small pool of water that had collected in a hollow of the cave floor. She carefully cleaned the wound, her touch gentle and soothing. Lyle flinched, but he didn't cry out. As she worked, she noticed something. A faint scar, barely visible beneath his skin, running along his shoulder blade. It was old, faded, but it was there. A long, jagged line, as if he had been clawed. Alira frowned. What's this? She asked, her fingers tracing the outline of the scar. Lyle stiffened, his body tensing. He looked away, his golden eyes clouded with a pain that went beyond the physical. It's an old wound, he said, his voice evasive. From a long time ago. Alira knew he was lying. There was something more to it, some hidden pain, some secret he was unwilling to share. A secret that felt like a betrayal. She pressed. Lyle, she prodded. Tell me. His jaw tightened. It was a hunter, he finally said, his voice low. A different kind of hunter. One who enjoyed the pain he caused. One from my past. Alira finished bandaging his wound, her hands lingering on his skin for a moment longer than necessary. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken emotions, with mistrust, with something else. Something she couldn't quite name. Something that scared her, even more than the hunters. She knew that trust was a two-way street, and he still kept his secrets hidden. What would it take to break the walls he was so carefully guarding? Chapter 8. The Price of Protection. The silence in the cave felt heavy, laden with unspoken questions and a growing sense of unease. Elira finished tying the makeshift bandage, her fingers lingering on Lyle's skin for a moment before she pulled away. The warmth of his body, the strength of his muscles beneath her fingertips, was a stark contrast to the coldness of the cave and the lingering fear of the hunter's attack. "Thank you," Lyle said, his voice low and husky, breaking the silence. He shifted slightly, adjusting the bandage, his golden eyes meeting hers. There was a flicker of something in his gaze. Gratitude? Or something more? Elira couldn't decipher it. She was still reeling from the confrontation, from the surge of power she had felt, from the realization that she was capable of defending herself, of defending him. But the lingering question of Lyle's past, the scar on his shoulder, the evasiveness in his voice, created a knot of doubt in her stomach. "Who was he?" she asked, her voice soft but insistent. "The hunter who did that to you." Lyle hesitated, his jaw tightening. He looked away, staring into the darkness of the cave, as if searching for an answer in the shadows. "His name was Silas," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "He was my brother." Elira's breath caught in her throat. His brother? The revelation struck her like a physical blow. It explained the pain in his eyes, the depth of the betrayal that she had sensed. It also raised a whole new set of questions. "Your brother hunted you?" she asked, her voice incredulous. Lyle nodded, his gaze still averted. "He believed I was a monster," he said, his voice laced with bitterness. "He believed he was doing the right thing, cleansing the world of my taint." He turned to face her, his golden eyes filled with a raw, vulnerable pain that made Elira's heart ache. "He was wrong," he said, his voice shaking slightly. But he couldn't see it. He was blinded by his fear, by his hatred. Elira reached out and gently touched his arm, her fingers resting on the rough fabric of his sleeve. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice filled with genuine empathy. She understood betrayal, understood the pain of losing someone you loved, someone you trusted. Lyle looked at her, his gaze searching her face. He seemed surprised by her compassion, by her willingness to offer comfort despite his past, despite his nature. "It was a long time ago," he said, his voice regaining some of its composure. "I've learned to live with it." But Elira knew he hadn't. The scar on his shoulder was a physical reminder of the betrayal, but the emotional scars ran much deeper. She could see it in his eyes, in the way he held himself, in the guardedness that surrounded him like a shield. "We should go," Lyle said, changing the subject abruptly. "It's not safe here. They might come back." Elira nodded, reluctantly agreeing. She wanted to stay, to talk more, to understand him better, but she knew he was right. The danger was still present, lurking in the shadows of Bonewood. They left the cave, stepping back into the moonlit forest. The air felt colder now, the whispering of the leaves more ominous. Elira felt a shiver run down her spine, a sense of foreboding that she couldn't shake. As they walked, Lyle remained silent, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. Elira sensed his withdrawal, his retreat back into the protective shell he had built around himself. She wanted to reach out to him, to bridge the gap that had formed between them, but she didn't know how. "Lyle," she said softly, breaking the silence. "What happens now? What about the curse? The deal?" He stopped walking and turned to face her, his golden eyes flickering in the dim light. "The curse is still active," he said, his voice grim. "The deal must still be fulfilled."
But things have changed.
"The hunters, they complicate things." "What do you mean?" Elira asked, her brow furrowed in concern. "They want to kill me," Lyle said, his voice flat. "They believe that by killing me, they can end the curse. They're wrong, of course, but they don't know that. And they won't stop until they succeed." "But you said I could break the curse," Elira said, her voice filled with confusion. "That I was the key." Lyle nodded. "You are," he said. "But it's not that simple. The curse is tied to Bonewood, to the ancient energies that flow through this place. It's complicated." He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "I need time," he said. Time to figure out how to proceed. Time to protect you. Alira felt a strange flutter in her chest at his words. Protect you. The thought was both comforting and unnerving. She was a grown woman, capable of taking care of herself. Or so she had believed. But the events of the past few hours had shaken her confidence, had revealed a vulnerability she hadn't known existed. What do you need me to do? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Lyle looked at her, his golden eyes intense. Stay with me, he said. Trust me. Let me guide you. Let me show you the way. His words were a plea, a request, a command, all wrapped into one. Alira hesitated, her mind filled with doubts, with fears, with questions. But she also felt a strange sense of inevitability. She was bound to this man, to this curse, to this forest. She couldn't escape it, not anymore. And a part of her, a small, flickering part of her, didn't want to. The cost was high, and her heart still ached. But she was no longer alone, not entirely. All right, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I'll stay with you. Lyle's face broke into something almost resembling relief, something akin to a smile. He held out a hand toward her. Then let us go. We will find shelter, and tomorrow, we find answers. Alira stared at his outstretched hand, before finally, hopefully, she reached out and took it. Chapter 9. Secrets in the Silver Ring. The shelter Lyle found was not a cave this time, but a small, abandoned cottage, hidden deep within a thicket of overgrown trees and thorny bushes. It was dilapidated, the roof partially collapsed, the windows boarded up, the door hanging precariously on its hinges. But it was dry, and it offered a semblance of protection from the elements and the prying eyes of the hunters. Once inside, Lyle quickly set about making the place habitable. He cleared away some of the debris, built a small fire in the hearth, and covered the broken windows with pieces of cloth he found in a dusty chest. Alira watched him, her mind still reeling from the events of the night, from the revelation of Lyle's past, from the growing sense of connection she felt towards him. As the fire crackled and the shadows danced on the walls, Alira noticed a small, wooden box on a shelf above the hearth. It was intricately carved, decorated with images of wolves and trees, and it seemed strangely out of place in the otherwise run-down cottage. What's that? She asked, pointing towards the box. Lyle followed her gaze, his expression shifting slightly. He seemed hesitant. It's just an old box, he said, his voice evasive. Nothing important. But Alira knew he was lying. There was something about the way he looked at the box, the way he avoided her eyes, that told her it held some significance. Lyle, she said softly, you can trust me. I know we haven't known each other long, but I'm on your side. I want to help. He looked at her, his golden eyes searching her face. He seemed to be weighing her words, assessing her sincerity. Finally, he sighed and reached for the box. He opened it carefully, revealing its contents. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a silver ring. It was a simple band, unadorned except for a single, small inscription on the inside. Alira leaned closer, her eyes straining to make out the inscription in the flickering firelight. It was written in an ancient language, one she didn't recognize, but as she stared at it, a strange sense of familiarity washed over her. It was as if the words were speaking to her, whispering secrets from the past. What does it say? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Lyle hesitated, then took a deep breath. Bound by blood, bound by fate, bound by the Bonewood's hate, he translated, his voice low and somber. Alira felt a chill run down her spine. The words were ominous, echoing the curse that had plagued her family for generations. It's about the curse, isn't it? She said, her voice trembling slightly. Lyle nodded. It's a reminder, he said, of the deal that was made, of the price that must be paid. He took the ring out of the box and held it up, the silver gleaming in the firelight. This ring belonged to Voss, he said. Your ancestor. It was a symbol of her power, of her connection to Bonewood. Alira reached out and touched the ring, her fingers tracing the smooth, cold metal. She felt a strange connection to it, a sense of recognition. It was as if she had worn it before, in another life, in another time. Maeve wore this ring when she made the deal. Lyle continued. She believed it would protect her, give her strength. But it didn't. It only served to bind her, to seal her fate. He looked at Alira, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and warning. This ring is powerful, Alira, he said. But it's also dangerous. It can amplify your connection to Bonewood, to the ancient energies that flow through this place. But it can also consume you. Alira stared at the ring, her mind racing. She felt drawn to it, tempted by its power, by the promise of connection to her ancestors, to Bonewood. But she also felt a sense of fear. She had seen what the curse had done to her family, to Thomas. She didn't want to become another victim. She recoiled, taking her hand away from the silver. Put it away, Alira stated. Her voice did not shake, which was progress from earlier, but it still lacked the strength of yesterday's defiance.
Please.
Lyle looked surprised. He opened his mouth to argue, but closed it without uttering a word. With a soft sigh that sounded almost like disappointment, he gently put the ring back inside the box. He closed the lid, the soft click echoing in the small room, and placed it back on the shelf. He turned back to face her. The fire was dying, but the dim light was enough to allow Alira to take in his features. He was tired. The shadows under his eyes were more prominent. I should rest, Lyle said, breaking the newfound silence. He gestured to a pile of blankets in the corner.
You as well.
Alira nodded. She was tired. Bone tired. The emotional and physical strain of the night had taken its toll. She went to the opposite corner and sat on the floor, using her shawl as a makeshift pillow. Lyle settled down on the blankets, his back to her. Alira watched him for a moment, the rise and fall of his chest, the way his dark hair curled around his neck. She felt a strange sense of protectiveness towards him, a desire to keep him safe, to shield him from the hunters, from the curse, from his own past. She closed her eyes, trying to push away the thoughts, the fears, the questions that swirled in her mind. But sleep wouldn't come. The image of the ring, the inscription, the whispered secrets, kept replaying in her head. She could not shake the feeling that it was just a taste of what's to come. The ring felt like a key, a piece of a larger puzzle. But what was the puzzle? And what would happen when all the pieces were finally put together? The questions, unanswered, felt heavy in her chest. The fire died down to mere embers, leaving Alira and Lyle in almost complete darkness. Chapter 10. A Dance with the Devil's Hound. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and filled with disturbing dreams. Alira dreamt of twisted trees, whispering voices, and golden eyes that watched her from the shadows. She dreamt of Thomas, his face pale and gaunt, his hand reaching out to her, only to fade away like smoke. She dreamt of the silver ring, its inscription glowing with an eerie light, its power calling to her, tempting her, threatening her. She woke with a start, her heart pounding, her body covered in a cold sweat. The cottage was dark, the fire reduced to a few glowing embers. Lyle was still asleep, his back to her, his breathing slow and even. Alira sat up, her mind still clouded by the remnants of her dreams. She felt uneasy, as if something were wrong, something were missing. She looked around the room, her eyes scanning the shadows, searching for something. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she knew she would recognize it when she saw it. And then she did. The wooden box, the one that had contained the silver ring, was gone. Alira's heart leaped into her throat. She scrambled to her feet, her eyes darting around the room, desperately searching for the box. But it was nowhere to be found. Lyle, she cried, her voice filled with panic. Lyle, wake up. The box, it's gone. Lyle stirred, groaning softly. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, his expression confused. What's wrong? He asked, his voice thick with sleep. The box, Alira repeated, her voice trembling. The one with the ring. It's gone. Someone took it. Lyle's eyes widened in alarm. He leaped to his feet, his gaze sweeping the room. He saw the empty space on the shelf where the box had been. His face paled. "Damn it," he muttered, his voice filled with anger and fear. "They found us."
Who?
Alira asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The hunters?" Lyle shook his head. "No," he said. This is something else. Something worse." He started pacing the room, his movements agitated, his golden eyes flickering with a dangerous light. "I should have known," he muttered. "I should have been more careful." "What is it?" Alira asked, her voice rising in panic. "What's happening?" Lyle stopped pacing and turned to face her, his expression grim. "There are others," he said, "who know about the curse, about the deal. Others who seek the power of Bonewood. Others who want the ring." He looked at Alira, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of apology and determination.
"I have to go after them," he said.
"I have to get the ring back." "Go after them?" Alira repeated, her voice incredulous. "Alone? You can't. It's too dangerous." Lyle smiled, a sad, fleeting smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I have to," he said. "It's my responsibility. I made a promise." But Alira began, but Lyle cut her off. "Stay here," he said, his voice firm. "It's safer for you here. I'll be back as soon as I can." He turned to leave, but Alira grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his flesh. "No," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm going with you." Lyle looked at her, his golden eyes searching her face. He seemed surprised by her insistence, by her willingness to face the danger alongside him. "Alira," he began, but she interrupted him again. "I'm not afraid," she said, her voice stronger now, fueled by a newfound determination. "I'm a Voss. We don't run from our problems. We face them. Together." Lyle hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right," he said. "But you must promise me you'll do exactly as I say. No questions. No arguments. Understood?" Alira nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what awaited them, what dangers they would face, but she knew she couldn't stay behind. She had to be with Lyle, to help him, to protect him. They left the cottage, stepping back into the pre-dawn light. The forest felt different now, more menacing, more alive. The whispering of the leaves seemed to be mocking them, taunting them, warning them. The air was thick with a strange, almost sickly sweet smell, a smell different from the usual forest scents. "What is that smell?" Alira asked, wrinkling her nose. Lyle stopped. He raised his head, sniffing the air, his expression turning grim. He looked afraid. And that, more than anything, scared Alira the most. "It's them," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "The hounds of Dathel." He grabbed her hand. "Run, Alira.
Run."
They ran, faster than Alira thought her old legs could carry her. The scent grew stronger, and she could now hear a noise, low and growing louder. It was the sound of growling, the sound of paws hitting the forest floor. Lyle pulled her behind a large tree, hiding them from view. Alira peeked. They were large, the size of bears. Their fur was black as the deepest night, blending with the shadows. And their eyes glowed, not gold, but a terrifying, unnatural red. One of them raised its ugly snout, sniffing. It was getting closer, too close. Lyle closed his eyes. He muttered something under his breath, something in the same ancient tongue that was inscribed on the ring. The scent faded. The growls grew distant. They were leaving. Slowly, Alira started to relax. They were safe for now. But Lyle remained tense. He opened his eyes, and Alira found herself lost in the golden depths. "We must be careful, Alira. They hunt by scent, by magic. And they are relentless." He paused. "We need to find who controls them. We need to get that ring back." Alira nodded. She had no idea what awaited them. But at least she wasn't alone. She had him. And Lyle. He had her. Chapter 11. The unraveling of Alira's heart. The near encounter with the hounds of Dathel left Alira shaken, but it also solidified her resolve. She was no longer just a grieving widow, hiding from the world in her quiet cottage. She was a woman caught in a supernatural struggle, a woman with a destiny she was only beginning to understand. And she was not alone. Lyle, despite his guardedness and the secrets he still held, had become a companion, a protector, a source of both fear and fascination. Elira found herself increasingly drawn to him, to his strength, his vulnerability, his unwavering determination to retrieve the stolen ring. They continued their journey through Bonewood, moving cautiously, avoiding the main paths, sticking to the shadows. Lyle was a skilled tracker, his senses honed by years of living in the wild. He could read the signs of the forest, the broken twigs, the faint footprints, the lingering scent of the hounds, guiding them towards their quarry. As they walked, Elira tried to piece together the fragments of information she had gathered. The curse, the deal, Maeve Voss, the silver ring, the hunters, the hounds of Dathel. It was a complex web of interconnected mysteries, and she felt like she was only scratching the surface. Lyle, she said softly, breaking the silence. Who are these others? The ones who took the ring? The ones who control the hounds? Lyle hesitated, his jaw tightening. He seemed reluctant to share, to reveal more of his secrets. But he also knew that he couldn't keep her in the dark forever. They are a cult, he said, his voice low and grim. They call themselves the Shadow Disciples. They worship the ancient powers of Bonewood, the dark forces that Maeve Voss tapped into. And they want the ring? Elira asked. Lyle nodded. The ring is a key, he said. It amplifies their power, allows them to control the hounds, to unleash the full fury of the curse.
But why?
Elira asked, her voice filled with confusion. What do they hope to gain? Lyle stopped walking and turned to face her, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and anger. They want to destroy Oakhaven, he said, his voice flat. They believe the village is a blight on Bonewood, a symbol of the modern world's encroachment on the ancient ways. They want to return the forest to its primal state. Elira's breath caught in her throat. Destroy Oakhaven?
The thought was horrifying.
She had lived near the village her entire life. It was her home, her community, even if she had withdrawn from it in recent years. We have to stop them, she said, her voice filled with determination. Lyle nodded. We will, he said. But it won't be easy. The Shadow Disciples are powerful, and they are ruthless. They won't hesitate to kill anyone who stands in their way. He looked at Elira, his golden eyes searching her face. Are you sure you're ready for this? He asked. This is not a game, Elira. This is war. The use of the word, war, sobered her. Elira met his gaze, her own eyes filled with a newfound strength. I am, she said. I may not be a warrior, but I'm not afraid. I'll do whatever it takes to protect Oakhaven, to protect you. The last word slipped out before she could stop it, and she felt a blush creep up her cheeks. She had meant to reveal her feelings so openly, so vulnerably. Lyle seemed surprised by her admission, his expression softening slightly. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. Elira, he began, his voice low and husky, but he stopped abruptly, as if catching himself. He pulled his hand away, his expression becoming guarded again. The moment was broken, the unspoken feelings hanging heavy in the air between them. Elira felt a pang of disappointment, a sense of loss. She had hoped, for a fleeting moment, that he might reciprocate her feelings, that he might reveal some of his own. But he remained closed off, his emotions hidden behind a wall of secrecy and pain. It was, she thought, beginning to unravel her. They continued their journey in silence, the unspoken tension between them adding to the already heavy atmosphere of Bonewood. Elira's thoughts were a whirlwind of emotions, of fear, of determination, of longing. She was falling for Lyle, she realized, despite the danger, despite the secrets, despite the curse that bound them together. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor, they reached a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a crumbling stone structure, its walls covered in ivy, its roof long gone. It looked like an ancient ruin, a forgotten temple, a place of power. This is it, Lyle said, his voice low and grim. This is where they're holding the ritual. Elira's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the dark energy emanating from the ruin, a palpable force that made her skin crawl. She could hear the faint sound of chanting, of drums beating, of growls. The hounds of Dathel were there. And so were the shadow disciples. And so was the silver ring. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Lyle looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a fierce determination. "We fight," he said. He drew his curved knife, the blade gleaming in the fading light. Alira took a deep breath, steeling her resolve. She had no weapon, no magic, no training. But she had courage. And she had Lyle. And, tonight, courage would have to be enough. She looked up. The moon was rising. And it was full. Chapter 12. Beneath a blood-red sky. The air crackled with an unnatural energy as Alira and Lyle approached the ruined temple. The chanting grew louder, a dissonant chorus that seemed to vibrate in the very ground beneath their feet. The growls of the hounds of Dathel sent shivers down Alira's spine, a primal fear that threatened to overwhelm her. But she pushed it aside, focusing on Lyle, on his strength, on his determination. They moved stealthily, keeping to the shadows, circling the clearing, assessing the situation. The scene before them was both terrifying and mesmerizing. The shadow disciples, dressed in dark robes, were gathered around a large bonfire in the center of the clearing. Their faces were hidden by hoods, but Alira could sense their fanaticism, their devotion to the dark powers they worshipped. They were chanting in unison, their voices rising and falling in a hypnotic rhythm, their bodies swaying to the beat of a large drum. The hounds of Dathel were tethered to large stone pillars, their black fur blending with the shadows, their red eyes glowing with an eerie light. They strained at their chains, growling and snapping, their saliva dripping from their fangs. They were restless, agitated, eager to be unleashed. And in the center of it all, standing before the bonfire, was a tall figure, draped in a robe of deep crimson. This figure held the silver ring aloft, its inscription glowing with a malevolent light. This, Alira knew, must be the leader of the shadow disciples, the one who controlled the hounds, the one who sought to unleash the full fury of the curse. "We need a plan," Alira whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "We can't just rush in there. We'll be overwhelmed." Lyle nodded, his gaze fixed on the scene before them. "I know," he said. "We need to create a distraction. Something to draw their attention, to give us a chance to get to the ring." He looked around the clearing, his eyes scanning the surroundings. He spotted a pile of dry wood near the edge of the forest, not far from where they were hiding. "I have an idea," he said, his voice low and urgent. "But it's risky." He explained his plan, his words brief and to the point. Alira listened, her heart pounding in her chest. It was a dangerous plan, a desperate gamble, but it was their only chance. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Lyle met her gaze, his golden eyes filled with a fierce determination. "It's the only way," he said. "Trust me." Alira nodded, her trust in him unwavering, despite the fear that gnawed at her. She would follow him, even into the heart of darkness. Lyle moved quickly, gathering dry leaves and twigs, stuffing them into his pockets. He crept towards the pile of wood, his movements silent and fluid, like a shadow slipping through the trees. Alira watched him, her heart in her throat, praying that he wouldn't be seen. The chanting continued, the drums beat, the hounds growled, their sounds filling the night with a sense of impending doom. Lyle reached the pile of wood. He carefully arranged the leaves and twigs, creating a small fire starter. He struck a flint against steel, sparks flying, catching the dry leaves, igniting a small flame. He quickly added more fuel to the fire, the flames growing larger, brighter, casting flickering shadows across the clearing. He waited until the fire was burning fiercely, then he turned and ran back towards Alira, his face illuminated by the firelight. The fire was not small. It was an inferno. The sky reflected the flames and turned the color of blood. "Now," he shouted, his voice barely audible above the roar of the flames. The distraction worked. The shadow disciples, startled by the sudden burst of light and heat, stopped chanting, their attention drawn to the raging fire. The hounds of Dathel, agitated by the flames, began to howl and bark, their red eyes glowing with an even greater intensity. Chaos erupted in the clearing. The disciples scrambled to put out the fire, their movements frantic, their voices raised in alarm. Lyle grabbed Alira's hand and pulled her towards the ruined temple, towards the leader of the shadow disciples, towards the silver ring. They ran through the chaos, dodging the panicked disciples, avoiding the snapping jaws of the hounds. The heat from the bonfire scorched their faces. The smoke filled their lungs. But they didn't stop. They reached the center of the clearing, where the leader of the shadow disciples stood, his back to them, his attention still focused on the raging fire. He was shouting orders to his followers, his voice filled with anger and frustration. Lyle released Alira's hand and drew his curved knife, the blade gleaming in the firelight. He moved silently, swiftly, like a predator stalking its prey. He was almost upon the leader when one of the hounds, its chains snapping under its immense strength, lunged at him, its jaws open, its fangs bared. Alira screamed, her heart leaping into her throat. She watched in horror as the hound attacked Lyle, its claws tearing at his flesh, its teeth sinking into his arm. It all seemed to unfold in slow motion. Lyle cried out in pain, but he didn't fall. He fought back, his knife flashing in the firelight, striking the hound again and again. But the hound was too strong, too powerful. It knocked Lyle to the ground, its weight pinning him down, its jaws closing around his throat. The leader was turning. Alira knew she had to do something. She had to save him. She looked around frantically, searching for a weapon, for anything she could use to help. Her gaze fell upon a large, broken piece of stone, lying near the base of a crumbling pillar. It was heavy, unwieldy, but it was her only hope. She ran towards the stone, her legs burning, her lungs aching. She reached it, gritted her teeth, and, with a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, lifted it above her head. She brought the stone down on the hound's head with all her might. Chapter 13. The Gathering Storm of Souls. The stone connected with the hound's skull with a sickening thud. The creature yelped, its grip on Lyle loosening, its red eyes flickering. Alira didn't hesitate. She raised the stone again and brought it down, again and again, until the hound lay still, its body limp, its life extinguished. Alira dropped the stone, her hands trembling, her body shaking with the aftershocks of the violent act. She had never killed anything before, not even an animal. The reality of what she had done, the brutality of it, washed over her, leaving her feeling sick and empty. But there was no time for remorse. Lyle was injured, bleeding, and the leader of the shadow disciples had turned, his gaze fixed on them, his face contorted with rage. "You," the leader hissed, his voice filled with venom. "You dare interfere with our ritual? You dare defy the power of Bonewood?" He raised his hand, the silver ring on his finger glowing with an even greater intensity. The remaining hounds, sensing their master's anger, began to howl and bark, their red eyes burning with a ferocious light. Lyle struggled to his feet, his arm bleeding profusely, his face pale and drawn. He held his knife ready, but he was clearly weakened, his movements slow and unsteady. "Alira," he whispered, his voice strained. "Get out of here."
Run.
"Save yourself." "No," Alira said, her voice firm, despite the fear that gnawed at her. "I won't leave you." She stood beside him, her body shielding his, her gaze fixed on the leader of the shadow disciples. She had no weapon, no magic, no training. But she had courage, and she had love. And she would not abandon Lyle to his fate. The leader of the shadow disciples laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed through the clearing. "Foolish woman," he said, "you cannot defeat me. I am the chosen one, the vessel of Bonewood's power. You are nothing." He began to chant, his voice rising in a crescendo, the words ancient and powerful, resonating with the dark energy of Bonewood. The air around him shimmered, crackled with an unnatural force. The hounds howled, their voices joining the leader's chant, creating a cacophony of sound that made Alira's head spin. She felt a surge of power, a tingling sensation that started in her fingertips and spread throughout her body. It was the same feeling she had experienced before, the awakening of her connection to Bonewood, to the ancient energies that flowed through this place. The mark of the wolf on her shoulder began to glow, a faint, golden light that illuminated the darkness. The leader of the shadow disciples noticed the glow, his eyes widening in surprise, his chanting faltering. Yuhi stammered, his voice losing some of its confidence. "You are one of them? A Voss?" Alira met his gaze, her own eyes filled with a newfound strength. "I am Alira Voss," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "And I will not let you destroy Oakhaven. I will not let you desecrate Bonewood." She raised her hand, her fingers pointing towards the leader, and focused her will, her energy, her connection to Bonewood. She didn't know what she was doing. She had no training, no guidance, but she trusted her instincts, her intuition. A surge of power erupted from her hand, a wave of golden light that struck the leader of the shadow disciples, knocking him off his feet, sending him sprawling across the clearing. The chanting stopped. The hounds fell silent. The air, which had been crackling with energy, suddenly stilled. The leader of the shadow disciples lay on the ground, dazed, his robe torn, his body bruised. The silver ring had fallen from his finger, rolling across the stones, coming to rest near Alira's feet. Lyle stared at Alira, his golden eyes wide with amazement. He had never seen such power, such raw, untamed energy. He had known she was strong. He had known she was connected to Bonewood, but he had never imagined the extent of her potential. Alira looked at her hand, her fingers tingling, her body trembling with the aftershocks of the power surge. She had done it. She had defeated the leader of the shadow disciples. She had saved Lyle. But the victory was short-lived. The remaining shadow disciples, recovering from their initial shock, began to advance on them, their faces filled with anger and hatred. They were outnumbered, outmatched, and Lyle was injured. "We have to go," Lyle said, his voice urgent. "We can't fight them all." He grabbed Alira's hand and pulled her towards the edge of the clearing, towards the safety of the forest. They ran, dodging the disciples, their footsteps echoing through the night. As they fled, Alira looked back at the ruined temple, at the fallen leader, at the scattered disciples, at the dying embers of the bonfire. She had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The sky above them, which had been reflecting the blood-red flames moments ago, was now brewing a real storm. The air was growing cold, and a strong wind started to blow. The forest, which she had considered her ally, was now turning. The branches were no longer helping, but hindering them, hitting her as they ran. The storm of souls that the ritual had started was only gaining momentum. They were running out of time. Chapter 14. Where Shadows Fear to Tread. The wind howled through the trees, whipping Alira's hair across her face, stinging her eyes. Rain began to fall, heavy and cold, soaking them to the bone. The forest, once a familiar sanctuary, had become a treacherous maze, the darkness amplified by the storm, the paths obscured by the downpour. Lyle, despite his injury, led the way, his strength and determination fueled by a desperate need to escape, to protect Alira. He moved with a surprising agility, his senses honed by years of living in the wild, navigating the treacherous terrain with an almost supernatural instinct. But the shadow disciples were relentless. They pursued them through the storm, their footsteps echoing through the trees, their chants carried on the wind, a constant reminder of the danger that lurked behind them. "We need to find shelter," Alira gasped, her breath coming in ragged bursts. She was exhausted, her legs burning, her lungs aching. The cold rain had chilled her to the bone, her body shivering uncontrollably. Lyle nodded, his gaze scanning the surroundings. "There's a cave," he said, his voice strained. "Not far from here. We can rest there." He guided her towards a narrow crevice in a rock face, hidden behind a curtain of cascading water. It was a small cave, barely large enough for the two of them, but it offered a semblance of protection from the storm and the pursuing disciples. They huddled together in the damp darkness, their bodies shivering, their breaths mingling in the cold air. Lyle leaned against the cave wall, his face pale and drawn, his injured arm cradled against his chest. Alira looked at him, her heart aching with concern. The wound on his arm was bleeding again, the makeshift bandage soaked with blood and rain. "Let me see your arm," she said, her voice soft but firm. Lyle hesitated, then slowly unwrapped the bandage, revealing the ugly gash. It was deep, inflamed, and clearly infected. Alira gently cleaned the wound with water from a small puddle that had collected on the cave floor. She tore a strip of cloth from her already tattered shawl, creating a new bandage, binding it tightly around his arm. "It needs more than this," she said, her voice filled with worry. "It needs a healer." Lyle shook his head. "There's no time," he said. "They'll be looking for us. We have to keep moving." "But you can," Alira began, but Lyle cut her off. "I'll be all right," he said, his voice firm, despite the pain that flickered in his golden eyes.
Eva indordvers.
Alira knew he was lying, trying to protect her, to reassure her. But she also knew that he was stubborn, that he wouldn't listen to reason. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the relentless drumming of the rain against the rocks, the howling of the wind through the trees. The darkness of the cave pressed in on them, amplified by the storm, creating a sense of isolation, of vulnerability. Alira felt a strange mix of emotions swirling within her. Fear, of course, for their safety, for Lyle's life. But also gratitude. For his protection, for his companionship, for the strange, undeniable connection that had formed between them. She reached out and gently touched his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. His hand was cold, but his grip was firm, reassuring. "Lyle," she said softly, breaking the silence. "Thank you for saving my life. For everything." He looked at her, his golden eyes searching her face. He seemed surprised by her gratitude, by her touch. "You saved my life too, Alira," he said, his voice low and husky. "You were brave. Stronger than you know." He paused, his gaze lingering on hers. He began, but he stopped abruptly, as if unsure of what to say. The unspoken words hung heavy in the air between them, a silent acknowledgement of the feelings that had grown between them, despite the danger, despite the curse, despite everything. Alira felt her heart flutter, a flicker of hope amidst the fear and uncertainty. She leaned closer, her gaze drawn to his lips, her body yearning for his touch. But before she could act on her impulse, before she could bridge the gap between them, a sudden noise shattered the silence. The sound of footsteps approaching the cave. Lyle's body tensed, his hand tightening around hers. He pulled her closer, shielding her with his body. "They found us," he whispered, his voice grim. The shadow disciples had caught up. Lyle rose to a crouch, knife in hand. He glanced to her, and then to the cave opening.
"Stay behind me."
"No matter what." Alira nodded, too afraid to even whisper. The figures appeared at the cave mouth. 3 of them, robed and armed. "There is no escape, Lyle," one of them said. His voice was just as menacing as their leaders had been. "Surrender the woman, and we might let you live." Lyle responded by lunging forward. He would not go down without a fight. And he would protect Alira with his last breath. The fight was brutal and quick. Lyle was injured and tired, but he fought with the ferocity of a cornered wolf. He managed to take down one, then another, but the third was too strong. Alira watched as Lyle was struck, as he crumpled to the floor. As the disciple stood above him, ready to deliver the final blow, she acted without thinking. She tackled the last remaining man, pushing him back towards the opening. The rain was still a force, and the ground was slippery. She pushed with all her might, and the man lost his footing.
He fell.
Alira watched as he plummeted down, disappearing into the raging waters below. She turned back to Lyle, who was attempting to stand, unsuccessfully. "We need to go now," Alira said, pulling him. She had no idea where now was. But anywhere was better than here. Anywhere was better than where the shadows roamed. Chapter 15. a promise forged in fire. Alira helped Lyle to his feet, his weight heavy against her, his breathing ragged. They stumbled out of the cave, back into the storm-ravaged forest, leaving behind the scene of the brutal fight, the memory of the fallen disciple, the lingering fear of pursuit. They moved blindly, driven by instinct, by a desperate need to escape, to find a place of safety, a place where they could rest, where Lyle could recover. The storm raged around them, the wind and rain a constant assault on their senses, the darkness obscuring their path, the trees seeming to reach out to them, to hinder their progress. Alira didn't know how long they walked, how far they traveled. Time seemed to lose all meaning, replaced by a relentless cycle of exhaustion, pain, and fear. She focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on supporting Lyle, on ignoring the burning in her lungs, the ache in her muscles, the cold that seeped into her bones. Finally, as the first faint light of dawn began to pierce through the storm clouds, they stumbled upon a small, abandoned shepherd's hut, nestled in a sheltered hollow, hidden from the wind and rain. It was a dilapidated structure, the roof partially collapsed, the walls crumbling, but it offered a semblance of shelter, a temporary respite from the relentless storm. They collapsed inside, their bodies exhausted, their spirits drained. Lyle slumped against the wall, his face pale and drawn, his injured arm bleeding again. Alira knelt beside him, her heart aching with concern. She gently removed the soaked bandage, revealing the wound. It was worse than she had feared. The edges of the gash were ragged, inflamed, the surrounding skin a sickly yellow-green. Infection had set in, and it was spreading quickly. "We need to find a healer," she said, her voice trembling with desperation. "You need medicine. Herbs. Something." Lyle shook his head weakly. "No time," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "They'll be looking for us. But you'll die if we don't." Alira began, but Lyle cut her off. "Listen to me," he said, his voice gaining a flicker of strength. "The curse, it's connected to the ring. We need to destroy it." "Destroy it?" Alira repeated, her voice filled with confusion.
"How?"
"You said it was powerful, that it amplified the connection to Bonewood." Lyle nodded weakly.
"It is," he said.
"But it's also a weakness. A focal point. If we destroy the ring, we can sever the connection. And the curse." He looked at Alira, his golden eyes filled with a desperate plea. "You have to do it, Alira," he said. "You have the power. You felt it. Back at the temple." Alira hesitated, her mind reeling. She had felt the power, the surge of energy that had flowed through her, that had allowed her to defeat the leader of the Shadow Disciples. But she didn't know how to control it, how to harness it. She was afraid of it, afraid of what it might do to her, to Lyle. "I don't know if I can," she said, her voice trembling. Lyle reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. "You can," he said, his voice firm, despite his weakness. "I believe in you, Alira. You are stronger than you think. You are the key." His words, his touch, his unwavering faith in her, gave Alira the strength she needed. She would do it. For Lyle, for Oakhaven, for herself. "Tell me how," she said, her voice gaining a newfound determination. Lyle explained, his voice growing weaker with each passing moment. He told her about a place, a hidden forge, deep within Bonewood, where the ring had been created. He told her about the ancient fire that burned there, a fire that could consume even the most powerful magic. He told her about the ritual, the words she needed to speak, the actions she needed to take. "It's dangerous," he warned, his voice barely a whisper. "The fire, it can consume you too. You must be careful." Alira nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew the risks, she understood the danger, but she was not afraid. She was ready. As Lyle drifted into unconsciousness, his breathing shallow and uneven, Alira knew she had to act quickly. She gathered some dry wood from a pile in the corner of the hut, building a small fire in the hearth. The flames flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, providing a small measure of warmth and light. She looked at Lyle, his face pale and still, his body weakened by injury and exhaustion. She leaned down and gently kissed his forehead, her lips lingering on his skin. "I promise you," she whispered, her voice filled with love and determination. "I will end this. I will break the curse. I will come back to you." She stood up, her gaze fixed on the flames. She took a deep breath, steeling her resolve. She was Alira Voss, a woman of Bonewood, a woman of power. And she would not fail. She walked out into the brand new day. She would not fail. Chapter 16. The Reckoning of Lost Souls. Alira followed Lyle's instructions, navigating the treacherous paths of Bonewood, her senses heightened, her determination unwavering. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean, the air fresh and crisp, the sun shining brightly in the clear blue sky. But the beauty of the forest did little to ease the fear that gnawed at her, the urgency that propelled her forward. She knew that time was running out. Lyle's life hung in the balance, and the shadow disciples were still out there, searching for them, seeking to reclaim the ring, to unleash the full fury of the curse. After what seemed like an eternity, she reached the hidden forge. It was located in a secluded clearing, surrounded by ancient trees, their branches intertwined, forming a dense canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. In the center of the clearing stood a crumbling stone structure, its walls blackened by centuries of fire, its roof long gone. Alira approached the forge cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the heat emanating from the structure, a palpable force that made her skin prickle. She could hear the faint crackling of flames, the whispering of the ancient fire that burned within. She stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The forge was a scene of organized chaos. Tools lay scattered across the floor. The walls were lined with shelves filled with strange objects. And in the center of the room, a large stone hearth, filled with glowing embers, radiating an intense heat that made Alira's breath catch in her throat. This was it. The place where the ring had been created, the place where it could be destroyed. Alira took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart, to focus her mind. She remembered Lyle's instructions, the words she needed to speak, the actions she needed to take. She approached the hearth, her gaze fixed on the glowing embers. The heat was intense, almost unbearable, but she forced herself to stand firm, to resist the urge to step back. She reached into her pocket, her fingers closing around the small, wooden box that contained the silver ring. She opened the box carefully, revealing the ring, its inscription gleaming in the firelight. She held the ring aloft, her hand trembling slightly. She closed her eyes, took another deep breath, and began to speak the ancient words that Lyle had taught her, her voice echoing through the silent forge. As she spoke, she felt a surge of power, a tingling sensation that started in her fingertips and spread throughout her body. It was the same feeling she had experienced before, the awakening of her connection to Bonewood, to the ancient energies that flowed through this place. The mark of the wolf on her shoulder began to glow, a faint, golden light that illuminated the darkness. The silver ring in her hand began to heat up, growing hotter and hotter, until it was almost unbearable to hold. Alira continued to chant, her voice rising in a crescendo, the words flowing from her lips, a torrent of ancient power. The fire in the hearth roared to life, the flames leaping higher, brighter, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The silver ring began to glow with an intense, white light, its inscription burning like fire. Alira felt a searing pain in her hand, as if the ring were trying to consume her, to draw her into the flames. But she held on, her grip firm, her determination unwavering. She would not be defeated. She would not let the ring control her. She would destroy it, and with it, the curse. With a final, desperate cry, Alira threw the ring into the heart of the flames. The fire erupted in a blinding flash of light, a wave of heat that washed over Alira, knocking her off her feet, sending her sprawling across the floor. She lay there for a moment, dazed, her body trembling, her ears ringing. She slowly sat up, her gaze fixed on the hearth. The fire had subsided, the flames returning to their normal size, the embers glowing softly. The silver ring was gone, consumed by the ancient fire, its power extinguished. Alira felt a sense of relief. A weight had been lifted from her shoulders, a burden she had carried for so long, finally released. The curse was broken. But the victory came at a cost. The surge of power, the intense heat, had taken its toll. Alira felt weak, drained, her body aching, her mind clouded. She struggled to her feet, her legs shaky, her vision blurred. She knew she had to get back to Lyle, to tend to his wounds, to tell him that they were free. But as she stumbled out of the forge, back into the clearing, she was met with a sight that made her blood run cold. The shadow disciples were there, surrounding the clearing, their faces hidden by their hoods, their hands holding weapons, their eyes filled with hatred. And standing before them, his face contorted with rage, was the leader, the one she thought she had defeated. He was alive, and he was different. His skin was pale and cracked. His eyes glowed with an unnatural red light, no longer human. He had harnessed the escaping energies of the curse, and he was now more powerful than ever. He raised his head and spoke, his voice dripping with malice. "You may have destroyed the ring, Voss," he said, his voice raspy and distorted, "but you cannot destroy the power of Bonewood.
It lives on in me."
He lunged at Alira, his hands outstretched, his fingers like claws, ready to strike. Alira was too weak, too exhausted, to fight. She closed her eyes, bracing herself for the inevitable. She was ready to accept her death. She had done what she had to do, but the blow never came. Instead, she heard a roar, a ferocious snarl that echoed through the clearing. She opened her eyes and saw a figure standing before her, shielding her from the leader's attack. It was Lyle. He was weak, injured, barely able to stand, but he was there, his golden eyes blazing with a fierce determination, his curved knife held ready. He had come for her. Chapter 17. The Shattered Reflection of Fate. Lyle stood between Alira and the transformed leader of the Shadow Disciples, a fragile barrier against the encroaching darkness. His body was battered, his arms still bleeding, but his eyes burned with a fierce protectiveness, a refusal to yield. "You will not touch her," Lyle growled, his voice raspy but firm, his stance defying his weakened state. The leader sneered, his red eyes fixated on Lyle. "You are weak, Wolf.
Dying.
You cannot stop me. The power of Bonewood flows through me now. I am its chosen vessel." "You are a parasite," Lyle retorted, his grip tightening on his knife. "Twisting the power of Bonewood for your own selfish desires. You defile it." The leader laughed, a chilling, distorted sound that echoed through the clearing. "Sentimentality will not save you. Or her." He lunged at Lyle, his movements swift and unpredictable, fueled by the dark energy that now coursed through his veins. Lyle parried the attack, his knife deflecting the leader's blows, but he was clearly outmatched. His strength was fading, his movements sluggish, his wounds hampering his agility. Alira watched in horror, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to help, to intervene, but she was still weak, drained from the ritual, her body trembling with exhaustion. She felt helpless, a spectator to a battle she could not influence, a battle that Lyle was destined to lose. The leader pressed his attack, his blows raining down on Lyle, forcing him to retreat, to give ground. He was relentless, driven by a mad desire for power, for revenge. "You should have stayed dead, Wolf," the leader hissed, his voice filled with venom. "You and your Voss whore." A surge of anger, of righteous fury, coursed through Alira. She would not stand by and let this creature insult Lyle, threaten her. She had broken the curse. She had faced her fears. She would not be intimidated. She focused her will, her energy, her connection to Bonewood. She had no training, no experience, but she had instinct, she had intuition, she had love. She reached out her hand, her fingers pointing towards the leader, and channeled the power that flowed through her, the power of Bonewood, the power of her ancestors. A wave of golden light erupted from her hand, striking the leader, throwing him back, interrupting his attack on Lyle. It wasn't as strong as before, not as powerful as the surge that had destroyed the ring, but it was enough. It gave Lyle a moment to recover, a chance to breathe. The leader staggered, his red eyes widening in surprise, his face contorted with pain. "You still have some fight left," he said, his voice grudging. "But it will not be enough." He turned his attention back to Lyle, his rage renewed, his determination to kill him unwavering. He lunged again, his movements even faster, even more ferocious. Lyle met his attack, his knife flashing in the sunlight, but he was weakening, his strength ebbing away. He was fighting on instinct alone, his body driven by a primal need to protect Alira, to survive. Alira knew that she had to do something, that she couldn't just stand there and watch Lyle die. She had to find a way to help him, to defeat the leader, to end this nightmare once and for all. Her gaze fell upon the scattered remnants of the forge, the tools, the broken pieces of stone, the lingering embers of the ancient fire. An idea sparked in her mind, a desperate gamble, a last resort. She ran towards the forge, her legs burning, her lungs aching. She ignored the pain, the exhaustion, the fear. She had a purpose, a mission. She reached the hearth, where the embers still glowed, radiating a faint heat. She grabbed a handful of the embers, her hands burning, but she didn't flinch. She turned back towards the battle, towards Lyle and the leader, who were locked in a deadly embrace, their bodies intertwined, their weapons flashing. She ran towards them, her hands outstretched, the glowing embers held before her like a weapon. "Lyle!" she cried, her voice filled with desperation.
Get down.
Lyle, hearing her voice, understanding her intent, reacted instantly. He ducked, dodging the leader's attack, rolling away from him. Alira threw the embers at the leader, her aim true. The embers struck him in the face, in the eyes, blinding him, searing his flesh. He screamed in agony, his hands flying to his face, his body convulsing in pain. He stumbled back, his movements uncontrolled, his rage replaced by a primal fear. Lyle seized the opportunity. He rose to his feet, his knife held high, and lunged at the leader, his movements swift and deadly. He plunged the knife into the leader's heart, piercing the corrupted flesh, ending his life, extinguishing the dark power that had consumed him. The leader's body went limp, his red eyes fading, his form dissolving into dust, scattering on the wind, leaving nothing behind but the lingering scent of sulfur and decay. Silence descended upon the clearing, broken only by Lyle's ragged breathing, by Alira's sobs of relief. The battle was over. The war was won, but the cost had been immense. Lyle collapsed, his body weakened beyond endurance, his wounds bleeding profusely. Alira rushed to his side, her heart filled with a mixture of joy and despair. The reflection in her mind, of the curse, of their struggles, of Lyle's sacrifice, was shattered. Chapter 18. Beyond the Veil of Tears. Alira knelt beside Lyle, cradling his head in her lap, her tears falling onto his pale, blood-streaked face. He was barely conscious, his breathing shallow and uneven, his pulse weak and fluttering. "Lyle," she sobbed, her voice choked with emotion.
Stay with me.
"Please stay with me." He opened his eyes, his golden gaze flickering, focusing on her with difficulty. He smiled weakly, a faint, fleeting expression that tore at Alira's heart. "Alira," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You did it. You broke the curse. But you're hurt," Alira said, her voice trembling. "You're dying." Lyle shook his head slightly. "It's all right," he whispered. "I'm at peace." "No," Alira cried, her voice filled with desperation. "You can't leave me. Not now. Not after everything." She gently touched his cheek, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, her tears mingling with the blood on his skin. She couldn't lose him. Not now, not after they had found each other, not after they had fought so hard to survive. "I love you, Lyle," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I love you." His eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise, of joy, crossing his face. He reached up and gently touched her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. I love you too, Elira, he whispered, his voice fading. Always his hand went limp, his grip loosening, his golden eyes closing, his breathing ceasing. He was gone. Elira screamed, a primal cry of grief and despair that echoed through the silent clearing. She held Lyle's body close, her tears falling onto his still face, her heart shattered into a million pieces. She had lost him. She had lost everything. She stayed there for a long time, cradling Lyle's body, her grief overwhelming, her world reduced to ashes. The sun rose higher in the sky, casting its warm rays upon the clearing, but Elira felt only coldness, only emptiness. She didn't know how long she sat there, lost in her grief, oblivious to the passage of time, to the world around her. But eventually, a faint sound broke through her despair, a gentle rustling of leaves, a soft whisper of wind. She looked up, her eyes blurred with tears, and saw a figure standing before her, bathed in a soft, golden light. It was Thomas. He smiled at her, his familiar, loving smile that had always warmed her heart. He looked as he had in the reflection, young, healthy, vibrant. Thomas, Elira whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. Is it really you? He nodded, his eyes filled with compassion. It's me, Elira, he said, his voice gentle and soothing. I'm here. He knelt beside her, his hand reaching out to touch her, but he didn't quite make contact. He was ethereal, translucent, a spirit, a memory, a manifestation of her love. You did it, Elira, he said. You broke the curse. You saved Bonewood. You saved him. He looked at Lyle's body, his expression filled with acceptance. He was a good man, Elira, he said. He loved you. He protected you. He deserved your love. Elira sobbed, her grief renewed, her heart aching with the pain of loss, of regret. I loved him too, Thomas, she whispered. But I couldn't save him. Thomas shook his head. You did save him, Elira, he said. You saved his soul. You freed him from the curse, from the darkness that had haunted him for so long. You gave him peace. He smiled at her, his eyes filled with love and understanding. It's time for you to live, Elira, he said.
To be happy.
To embrace the future. You have a new life ahead of you, a life free from the curse, free from the shadows. He stood up, his form beginning to fade, his image becoming more translucent. I'll always be with you, Elira, he said. In your heart, in your memories, in the whispers of Bonewood. He smiled one last time, then vanished, disappearing into the golden light, leaving Elira alone once more, with Lyle's body, with her grief, with her memories. But she was no longer completely alone. She had Thomas's blessing, his forgiveness, his love. And she had the knowledge that Lyle was at peace, that his soul was free. She looked down at Lyle's face, his features serene, his body still. She gently closed his eyes, kissed his forehead, and whispered a final farewell. Goodbye, my love, she said, her voice filled with sorrow and gratitude.
Thank you.
For everything. She stood up, her legs shaky, her body weak, but her spirit renewed. She had a long journey ahead of her, a journey of healing, of rebuilding, of rediscovering herself. But she was no longer afraid. She was Elira Voss, a woman of Bonewood, a woman who had faced her demons, who had broken the curse, who had loved and lost, and who would live on, carrying the memories of those she had loved in her heart forever. She looked to the sky. It was no longer full of storms. It was clear, and a new path was laid before her. She took the first step. Chapter 19. The Heart's Final Stand. Elira left the clearing, leaving behind Lyle's body, leaving behind the shattered remnants of the forge, leaving behind the ghosts of the past. She walked slowly, her body aching, her spirit wounded, but her heart filled with a quiet determination, a newfound sense of purpose. She returned to Oakhaven, to the village she had withdrawn from in her grief, to the community she had once shunned. She was no longer the same woman who had left, the grieving widow, hiding from the world. She was Elira Voss, a woman who had faced her demons, who had broken the curse, who had loved and lost, and who was ready to embrace the future, whatever it may hold. The villagers, at first, were wary of her, unsure of what to make of her sudden reappearance, of the strange stories that had begun to circulate about her, about the events that had transpired in Bonewood. They had heard whispers of the curse, of the shadow disciples, of the hounds of Dathel, of the woman who had walked with a wolf, who had fought the darkness, who had saved them all. But Alira, with her quiet strength, her gentle kindness, her unwavering resolve, slowly won them over. She told them the truth, about the curse, about Lyle, about the sacrifice he had made to protect them, to protect Bonewood. She shared her grief, her loss, her love, and in doing so, she began to heal, not only herself, but the wounds of the community, the lingering fear that had haunted them for generations. She became a healer, a protector, a leader. She used her connection to Bonewood, her newfound understanding of its power, to help others, to heal the sick, to protect the village from harm, to guide them towards a future free from the shadows of the past. She rebuilt her life, piece by piece, finding solace in her work, in her community, in the memories of those she had loved. She never forgot Thomas, her beloved husband, the man who had first shown her the meaning of love. And she never forgot Lyle, the wolf, the protector, the man who had stolen her heart, who had sacrificed his life to save hers, to save them all. But life, as it always does, had one final challenge in store for her. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the village green, Alira was walking home from the small clinic she had established, where she treated the sick and injured, using her knowledge of herbs and her connection to Bonewood's healing energies. She paused, her gaze drawn to a figure standing at the edge of the forest, silhouetted against the fading light. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothing. He was familiar and yet different. As she drew closer, her heart began to pound in her chest, her breath catching in her throat.
It couldn't be.
It was impossible. The man turned, his face illuminated by the last rays of the setting sun. His eyes were gold. "Lyle?" Alira whispered, her voice filled with disbelief, with a flicker of hope, with a surge of overwhelming emotion. He smiled, a slow, familiar smile that warmed her heart, that chased away the shadows of doubt, of fear. "Alira," he said, his voice low and husky, the voice she had thought she would never hear again. He was alive. He stepped towards her, his movements hesitant, as if unsure of his reception, as if afraid of shattering the fragile illusion. Alira ran to him, her arms outstretched, her tears flowing freely. She embraced him, holding him tight, her body trembling with relief, with joy, with a love that had defied death itself. "But how?" she asked, her voice choked with emotion. You died.
I saw you die."
Lyle gently stroked her hair, his touch sending shivers of warmth through her body. "The curse was broken, Alira," he said. "And with it, the bonds that held me captive. The power of Bonewood, it healed me. It brought me back." He looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a love that mirrored her own, a love that had transcended death, that had overcome the darkness. "I told you I would come back to you," he said, his voice filled with emotion. Alira laughed, a joyous, tearful sound that echoed through the twilight air. She held him tighter, her heart overflowing with a happiness she had never thought possible. They stood there for a long time, embraced in the fading light, their hearts reunited, their souls intertwined, their love a beacon of hope, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. They had faced their demons, they had broken the curse, they had loved and lost, and they had found each other again, beyond the veil of tears, beyond the shadows of the past. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they walked hand in hand, towards the village, towards their future, towards a life filled with love, with peace, with the promise of a new beginning. It was the final stand of a weary heart. And it had won. Chapter 20. The Legacy of Bonewood. The return of Lyle was a miracle, a testament to the enduring power of love and the mysterious ways of Bonewood. Alira and Lyle, reunited, began to build a life together, a life rooted in the village of Oakhaven, a life dedicated to healing and protecting the community they had both come to cherish. The villagers, initially stunned by Lyle's reappearance, soon embraced him as one of their own. They had heard the stories, they had witnessed Alira's grief, and they understood the sacrifice he had made. They saw the love that shone between him and Alira, a love that had defied death itself, and they welcomed him with open arms. Lyle, no longer burdened by the curse, no longer haunted by the shadows of his past, found a peace he had never known before. He embraced his connection to Bonewood, using his knowledge of the forest, his understanding of its power, to help Alira in her work, to protect the village from harm, to guide them towards a harmonious coexistence with the natural world. Together, Alira and Lyle established a sanctuary, a place of healing and learning, nestled at the edge of Bonewood. They taught the villagers about the power of herbs, about the importance of respecting the forest, about the interconnectedness of all living things. They shared their stories, their experiences, their love, inspiring others to embrace their own strengths, to overcome their own challenges, to find their own path to healing and happiness. The years passed, marked by the changing seasons, by the cycle of life and death, by the growth of the community, by the deepening of their love. Alira and Lyle, their hair now streaked with silver, their faces lined with the wisdom of age, remained inseparable, their hands clasped together, their hearts intertwined, their souls bound by a love that had transcended time and space. They often walked together in Bonewood, hand in hand, revisiting the places that held significance for them, the clearing where they had first met, the ruined temple where they had faced their greatest challenge, the hidden forge where the curse had been broken. They remembered the past, the struggles, the losses, the sacrifices, but they also looked to the future, with hope, with optimism, with a deep appreciation for the present moment. One day, as they were walking through the forest, they came across a young woman, sitting beneath a giant oak tree, her face filled with sadness, her eyes clouded with despair. She reminded Alira of herself. Years ago, when she had been lost in her grief, withdrawn from the world, burdened by the weight of the curse. Alira and Lyle approached the young woman, their hearts filled with compassion. They listened to her story, her struggles, her fears, and they offered her comfort, guidance, and support. They shared their own experiences, their own journey of healing, and they showed her that there was hope, that even in the darkest of times, there was always a light to guide the way. The young woman, inspired by their words, by their love, by their example, began to heal. She found solace in their sanctuary, in their community, in the embrace of Bonewood. She discovered her own strength, her own resilience, her own path to happiness. And as Alira and Lyle watched her blossom, they realized that their legacy was not just about breaking the curse, about protecting the village, about healing the sick. It was about passing on their knowledge, their wisdom, their love, to the next generation, to those who would come after them, to those who would continue their work, to those who would carry the torch of hope into the future. Their legacy was Bonewood itself, the ancient forest, the source of their power, the symbol of their love, the testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. It was a legacy of healing, of protection, of community, of connection, of love. A legacy that would live on, long after they were gone, whispered on the wind, rustling through the leaves, echoing in the hearts of those who called Bonewood home. They lived quiet lives, but full ones, lives filled with love and purpose. And they lived it together. Epilogue. The years continued their relentless march, painting Alira and Lyle's hair with the silver of time, etching lines of wisdom and laughter onto their faces. They remained the heart of Oakhaven, their sanctuary a beacon of hope and healing, their love a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. One crisp autumn evening, as the leaves of Bonewood turned to gold and crimson, Alira and Lyle sat hand in hand on the porch of their cottage, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues. They were old now, their bodies frail, their movements slow, but their eyes still shone with the same love, the same light that had brought them together so many years ago. "It's been a good life, hasn't it?" Elira said softly, her voice raspy with age, her gaze fixed on the setting sun. Lyle smiled, his hand tightening around hers. "The best," he said, his voice equally soft, his golden eyes filled with a lifetime of shared memories. They sat in silence for a while, content in each other's presence, their hearts overflowing with gratitude for the life they had shared, for the love they had found, for the legacy they had created. As the last rays of the sun faded below the horizon and the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Elira leaned her head against Lyle's shoulder, her body weary, her spirit at peace. "I'm tired, my love," she whispered. Lyle gently stroked her hair, his touch as tender as it had always been. "Then rest, my love," he said.
Rest.
Elira closed her eyes, a faint smile on her lips. She felt a sense of profound peace, a sense of completion, a sense of coming home. She drifted off to sleep, her breathing slow and even, her heart beating in time with Lyle's. She dreamt of Bonewood, of the whispering trees, of the golden eyes that had first captured her heart, of the love that had sustained her through a lifetime of challenges and triumphs. She dreamt of Thomas, his smiling face welcoming her, his arms outstretched in greeting. She dreamt of the silver ring, its power extinguished, its curse broken. She dreamt of the future, of the generations to come, of the legacy of Bonewood, of the love that would live on, long after she was gone. As she slept, her grip on Lyle's hand loosened, her breathing grew shallower, her heartbeat fainter. And then, with a final sigh, she was gone. Lyle, his heart heavy with grief, but also filled with a profound sense of gratitude, held her close, his tears falling onto her still face. He knew that she was at peace, that she was reunited with Thomas, that her soul was free. He sat there for a long time, cradling her body, watching the stars wheel across the night sky, remembering the life they had shared, the love they had found, the legacy they had created. And as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Lyle felt a gentle breeze stir through the trees, carrying with it the scent of pine needles and wood smoke, the whisper of Bonewood, the echo of Elira's laughter. He smiled, his heart filled with a love that would endure beyond time, beyond space, beyond death itself. He knew that they would be together again, someday, in the heart of Bonewood, where their souls had first intertwined, where their love had blossomed, where their legacy would live on forever. He looked down at her face. He gently kissed her forehead. He closed his eyes and followed her. Together always.